74,000 years ago, a volcano erupted in what is now Sumatra. Not a regular eruption, not the kind that closes airports and makes the news for a week. This was the largest volcanic event in the last 2 million years of Earth's history. Mount Toba ejected roughly 2,800 cubic kilometers of material into the sky. The ash clouds spread across South Asia, the Middle East, and Africa. Sulfur aerosols reached the stratosphere and blocked enough sunlight to drop global temperatures by up to 5 degrees Celsius. The growing season in the northern hemisphere collapsed for years. Across the planet, ecosystems that had taken thousands of years to build fell apart within a generation. And somewhere in that catastrophe, the entire human species nearly disappeared. Genetic studies of living humans carry the evidence. When researchers trace modern human DNA backward, they find a bottleneck, a point where the genetic diversity of our species compresses to almost nothing, suggesting the global population dropped to somewhere between 10,000 and 100,000 individuals, maybe fewer. For context, there are more tigers alive today than there may have been humans after Toba. The question that should keep you up at night isn't why Toba was so devastating, it's why anyone survived at all. To answer that, you first have to understand what was happening on Earth at the same time as Toba, because humans weren't the only species facing catastrophic conditions. The megafauna of the ancient world had the same problem. The woolly mammoth, the saber-toothed cat, the giant ground sloth. These animals were enormous, powerful, built for exactly the environments they occupied. And one by one, across the same period of climatic chaos that humans navigated, they disappeared. Not all at once, but consistently enough that by 10,000 years ago, most of the large mammals that had dominated every continent on Earth were gone. The question nobody asks loudly enough is why a relatively small, physically unimpressive primate survived events that wiped out creatures 10 times its size. The obvious answer is intelligence. That's not wrong, but it's incomplete, and the incomplete version misses the actual mechanism, the specific thing ancient humans were doing that nobody else was doing, which made all the difference when the sky filled with ash. Dr. Patrick Roberts at the Max Planck Institute and Dr. Brian Stewart spent years analyzing where ancient humans were living during the periods of maximum environmental stress. What they found overturned a basic assumption. Humans weren't surviving in spite of the chaos. In a specific way, they were structured for it. Every other large animal on Earth at the time was what ecologists call a specialist. A mammoth needed specific grasses. A saber-toothed cat needed specific prey at a specific size. When the climate shifted those ecosystems, the specialists had nothing to pivot to. Their entire biology had been refined for conditions that no longer existed. Humans were something different. The researchers described them as generalist specialists, a category that sounds contradictory until you understand what it means. Humans could eat almost anything: roots, shellfish, insects, bark, small game, large game, fruit, seeds, not optimally, not preferentially, but survivably. When the volcanic winter killed the large prey, they ate smaller prey. When that disappeared, they ate what was in the water. When the water was gone, they moved. And moving was the second part of the answer. A mammoth herd couldn't meaningfully relocate to a different climate zone. The logistics of moving that much body mass that far were nearly impossible. A human group carrying everything they needed in their hands could walk to a new environment in weeks. The researchers found evidence of this across the archaeological record. Human populations retreating into what they called micro-refugia, sheltered pockets of the landscape where local conditions remained stable even as the broader region collapsed. The coast was one of them. Pinnacle Point in South Africa shows continuous human habitation across the Toba period. The ocean's thermal mass buffered coastal temperatures. Shellfish, unaffected by the ash cloud in the way that land animals were, kept producing food. The humans who happened to be near the water when the sky changed had a food system that the disaster couldn't reach. But here's the part that doesn't get talked about nearly enough. The survival advantage that mattered most wasn't physical at all. It was stored in sound. In non-literate societies, the elders weren't just respected, they were the most critical survival infrastructure a group possessed. Everything they had learned across a lifetime of environmental observation was irreplaceable. Where the underground water sources were during a drought, which plants became toxic under certain conditions, which coastal formations indicated an incoming wave, what the behavior of specific animals meant before a seismic event. This knowledge couldn't be written down. So humans developed the only alternative that worked at scale. They built it into stories. Dr. Patrick Nunn at the University of the Sunshine Coast spent years analyzing Australian Aboriginal oral traditions and found something that shouldn't be possible. These stories, passed down through generations of telling, contained accurate geographical descriptions of coastlines that existed before the end of the last ice age, before sea levels rose and swallowed thousands of miles of land between 7,000 and 10,000 years ago. The stories remembered a world that had been underwater for millennia, the specific coastal features, the place names, the warnings about which areas would flood, stories as geological archives, accurate across 10,000 years of oral transmission. This is the technology nobody thinks of when they think of ancient human survival. Not a spear or a fire, a story told correctly, remembered carefully, and passed to the next generation before the person who knew it died. The proof that this system still works appeared in December 2004. When the Indian Ocean earthquake triggered the tsunami that killed more than 200,000 people across 12 countries, the indigenous communities of the Andaman and Nicobar Islands recorded near-zero casualties. Not because they had warning systems or modern technology, because their oral traditions contained an instruction that had been passed down for generations. When the sea pulls back from the shore, go immediately to high ground. That's not instinct. That's stored information. Someone, at some point in the distant past, survived a tsunami by understanding the behavior of the water before it returned. They survived it, encoded it, and kept it alive through every generation between that moment and 2004. The knowledge worked across whatever gap of time separated the original observation from the people who acted on it. 200,000 people with access to satellites, weather services, and coastal monitoring infrastructure died. The communities carrying 10,000-year-old oral instructions survived. So here's what actually happened after Toba. The humans who made it through weren't the strongest. They weren't the biggest. They weren't the ones who stayed and fought the collapsing ecosystem. They were the ones who moved fast, ate anything, shared what they knew, and kept that knowledge alive in stories specific enough to be actionable centuries later. The mammoth was better designed for the world as it was. Humans were better designed for the world as it might become. That distinction sounds abstract, but the Toba ash layer in the geological record sits right above the bones of the mammoth's ancestors, and right alongside the tools of ours. The disaster didn't change which species was physically stronger. It changed which species had something the volcano couldn't touch. Not bone, not muscle, not size. Information, stored in voices, passed through generations. Accurate enough, 10,000 years later, to tell a group of people on an island to run for the hills before the wave arrived. That's what survived Toba. That's what's still here.